people who don't know me, I'm Load Ray Dio. Also write novels as Zach ZYZ, and I do a bunch of these AMAs whenever it's not somebody real fancy. Rose, I want to ask you a couple questions about your background real quick. So you're living in Sweden now. Were you born in Sweden?
Yes, I was born in Sweden, but I have
Okay.
moved around quite a bit.
Okay.
I've lived in Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Singapore, Spain, and yeah. So
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I'm in Brooklyn, New York right now, but
mhm.
I've lived all over the map as well. I'm originally from New Orleans, and I've lived in Brixton, London, California, and so the people that we're going to be discussing when we talk about systemic racism are my neighbors that I hang out with every single day. Um, are you currently a student? Are you employed? What do you do?
I'm currently finishing off my last year of high school. Actually, I'm 17 years old. I'm working on
17
an
years old.
international. Yep, I'm
God
working on an
Almighty.
IB, International Baccalaureate program. So I'm set to take my exams in May, unless COVID has a massive resurgence. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at academically right now.
I don't think so at this point, from the data that I'm seeing, but I've been
Yeah,
wrong before.
hopefully.
I thought we would just let everybody die off and then, reset from 0, but, sadly, no. Maybe next time.
Yep,
Okay.
that's much better.
So let me get to some of these questions that people have. So you're 17 years old. Have you worked before? Have you had, like, a part-time job or anything like that?
The closest I've had to a part-time job is the streaming stuff that I've been doing now. So no.
A streaming setup that you've done, so you haven't worked,
Nope.
which, I mean, is understandable at 17. We start work a little bit earlier in the US, but it's
Mhm.
just because we're desperately poor. So it's nothing to be happy about there.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm gonna get to some of the questions. I will attempt to get through as many they're saying that you have to have the underage role in they're
I
smacking you with
already
the
did.
underage role. It's ridiculous. How old do you have to be to, drink in Sweden?
There's a bunch of different laws with that. So, for example,
Mhm.
I think if you're at home and you're drinking with your parents, I think it's like 15 to drink in bars. It's 18 to buy. It's like 21. So there's like sort of like different
Alright.
levels to it there. But yeah.
It's kinda similar to how it is in the UK for the most part,
Mhm.
so that's not too bad. Okay. So, like I said, I'm gonna try to get through as many of these. I'm gonna start with the pinned questions from the bottom of the list. If I skip over your question, I may come back to it later. I just don't think you or your question are important. Uh, and if we'll try to get through as many as possible, and then we'll get into some of the bullshit questions. We have, at least until, I would say, about 5 p.m. here, but we may end earlier if one of us dies or is stabbed during this whole thing. So,
Understandable.
thank you to Cube for setting up this channel, and thank you to Politics Discord for allowing us to have this fantastic conversation. So, Etheris Hispada says, "What do you think about the European Parliament? Are you interested in it? If so, which parliament group or groups would you endorse?" And if we hit a question, and this is just like a general thing, if we hit a
Mhm.
question where it's not really your area of expertise, or you don't care, it's totally fine to move on to another question because there is a bunch.
Yeah, I see what you mean here. When it comes to European Parliament politics, I'm not super like well in tune with that. I'm mostly in tune with like American or like Swedish local politics. I do have some general prescriptions when it comes to the EU as a whole, but that's not quite what you're asking. So, this question specifically, I am not going to have a strong stance
Okay,
on.
let's move on. All right, so I grief a little and CLSL have some corresponding questions right here.
Mhm.
So yesterday in the Discord server, we had a gigantic AMA with Nicholas J. Fuentes, which
Mhm.
got shut down by the copyright cops. He was banned midstream, is my understanding there.
Damn.
So I grief a little asks, do you think any level of nationalism in people is okay? For example, the idea of being patriotic. And then CLSL says, "Hey Rose, what do you think about Nick Fuentes? Do you think you could take him in a fight?"
Okay, so first question on patriotism. I think that patriotism and some degree of nationalism is okay as long as it's used for a motivator in, like reasonable goals. So like key issues I tend to identify with nationalism is that it tends to oftentimes sort of like underlie or suggest a an understanding or an underlying belief that of some form of like exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, most of the time when it comes to the vast majority of people who talk about politics online. And the issues with using nationalism as sort of like a driving force in making change is that it often leads to the end goals not necessarily being ones that I would support. So the end goals being like conservative goals, for example, or protectionist goals, for example, which are things that I would be against. However, if your patriotism comes from a place of like, hey, you know what, I genuinely just like love my local communities. I have like visited all around my country, and there's cool people everywhere. I kind of like it, and I just want to make sure that this country, just like all the others, is as good as possible. And because I'm here, I'm gonna have like a stronger feeling towards this country here. And if you're gonna use that as a motivator to make your country better, and it's the ways I want to make the country better is like fact based and rational, then yeah, sure, go for it. It's
Mhm.
fine. That's the only issue I
Okay.
see with some
So
types of nationalism.
let me pose a hypothetical here.
Go
Let's
for it.
say that Sweden has a pretty good like Sweden is probably. Would you say that Sweden is most in line with your current political views? If we pick all the countries that are available right now, is
Mhm.
Sweden the closest aligned with how you view the world, or is there another country that you feel does a better job of representing the closest in action, realistic portrayal of your views?
So I tend not to often attach my ideas to different countries.
Mhm.
I tend to have like a set of different like policy proposals that I like from each individual country, and then sort of like go from there. So there's a bunch of different countries in Europe that I like their individual policies, and then I go
Mhm.
from there. The issue that I often see with going like supporting one country in its entirety is that you get a bunch of different like questions on it. Oh, like what about this? What about that? And the root cause of those problems is often not necessarily an effect of an infrastructure like a system that I necessarily support. I would say that right now, though, Sweden is it's pretty decent when it comes to that. I think that the major problem we have right now in Sweden is generally a problem of incompetence within government, and a sort of like cultural like dialogue that is very sort of oriented around, even though it's coming from a left-wing person, there's a lot of virtue signaling going on here in Sweden. There's a lot of like misunderstandings as for where individual social problems come from and stuff like that. And that would probably be like the biggest problem identifier in Sweden right now. If we got like more competent leadership and went more towards the sort of like progressive policies that Sweden historically has held pretty well, then yeah, Sweden would easily be, I guess, my number one example of like a state that I would see like, yeah, it's pretty decent in that regard.
Okay. So that was, and I'll be careful about asking hypotheticals here. So essentially, that was in the service of the question of nationalism.
Mhm.
So if we get to the point where you feel that Sweden is doing an okay job of representing some of the policies that you feel are best for mankind, would it
Mhm.
ever be okay for Sweden to take over other areas in order to incorporate it into itself to lay down hegemony? Like, would the world be a better place if Sweden ruled the earth and was able to enact its social agenda over broad swaths of territory, including places where they don't have a ton of human rights, Saudi
Mhm.
Arabia, Russia, etc.
So generally, the way by which I wish to sort of like push or reinforce my social beliefs or my just general political inclinations on the world as a whole
Mhm.
is typically through a more like diplomatic, trade-oriented way of viewing the world, through more like economic and political soft pressures rather than necessarily like military hard pressures that come
Mhm.
with, for example, an invasion and stuff like that. Now, should there be, for example, a massive like fascist uprising in one of the countries that may threaten the well-being of like the citizens dramatically, or like neighboring countries, then yes, I would be in favor of some form of military intervention. But I think that
Like
the
say
most
like a genocide currently ongoing in China, like of
the
the
thing with
Uyghurs? Yeah.
yeah, the thing with like the Uyghur genocide in China is that there's like Sweden right now like wouldn't be able to like step in there.
Mhm.
But should there like come to a point in which the more like, I guess, heavier pressure when it comes to trade, and there's a lot of like diplomatic arguments going on right now with the United States and China, which are going kind of meh right now, then perhaps that could be seen as a like solution in the long term. But right now it seems like the cost benefit analysis there right now doesn't seem like it would bring about overall like positive effects
Yeah.
on the world as a whole. But
Right,
it's
and then
it's a very
CL,
complicated.
yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, it's one thing to say invade China. It's a whole different matter to invade China itself, as many people have found out so far.
Mhm.
So CLSL then followed up with, what do you think about Nick Fuentes? And you can use this as a springboard to talk about some of your right wing competitors in the YouTube streaming sphere. How do you feel about these people? Do you feel that their rhetoric is more effective than your rhetoric? And just what's your general idea there?
So the things I would talk about, for example, Nick Fuentes, is I'm not outwardly familiar with his individual content. The most things I've
Mhm.
seen is like sort of like debates where he's engaged with other content creators, and that's sort of like where most of my understanding of his content comes from. To me, I mean, Nick Fuentes is undeniably a pretty good rhetorician. He is charismatic, and that's why he's been able to amass all this support. However, it's fairly undeniable from at least what I've seen that he is, a neo-Nazi, or at least like a neo-Nazi adjacent. So obviously, I very much do not share his goals. But he is generally a very very skilled rhetorician, and he's able to do a lot of stuff that leftist content creators or like progressives haven't been able to do for a long period of time. Now there have been like occasional examples of progressive content creators, like for example Destiny doing in my opinion a pretty good job of not necessarily shutting him down, but at least like quelling his advances, which I find I find pretty admirable and pretty good. Apart from the new like sort of like rising kind of Nazbol neo-Nazi esque like wave on the right when it comes to online political discourse. Most of the like mainstream conservative right and like skeptic communities have like fallen apart really once they have begun to be like challenged by a lot of the lefties and the progressives. I would say that right now you have strong like progressives holding this sort of like dominant, I suppose, debate titles, if you put it that way, when it comes to having face to face discussions in the free marketplace of ideas when it comes to political issues. So we'll have to see. Maybe more like Nick Fuentes types are able to amass more support and really like have these high profile debates with prominent progressives, and maybe that shifted over a bit. But right now, it still feels like even though Nick Fuentes is charismatic and is rhetorically efficient, he's still not. They're still not quite at the level of sort of like I suppose online presence. I would say that a lot of the progressives are at right now. That is completely different, however, in Sweden. Recently, I've been going after more of the Swedish community as well because I feel like that's what I'm most well equipped to do, and there's not a lot of people that are able to do this type of thing due to like language barriers, but also just locality. And in Sweden, it's like someone had like a nature protection, reservoir for like just overall 2016 YouTube with the Skeptosphere, and that's just kind of like retained itself right now in Sweden because you haven't really had any progressives go in and challenge the Swedish right winger. So we very much still have a alive and well Skeptosphere here in Sweden, which I seek to get at as much as possible.
Okay, so our next question was a voice chat question, but I no longer see this individual in the voice chat. So
Mhm.
if you, some people have asked to ask their questions themselves, but you have to be in the channel and active at the time. So I'm going to read it off for him here. This is from King Revenge. He has two questions. He says,
Mhm.
one, what is your view on the Second Amendment in the United States, which is the right to bear arms? And then two, what's your view on the current border crisis that's happening at the Mexico border, where just like a shit ton of refugees are coming through, and it's being revealed that there are sort of pretty gruesome internment camps where everybody is covered with aluminum foil.
Mhm. So when it comes to the Second Amendment specifically, I may be a bit, I suppose, colored by my Eurocuck tendencies, but I am very much against the Second Amendment. I feel like it has initially, it did have a strong purpose initially upon its drafting, but I feel right now in the contemporary day and age, it's doing more harm than it is doing good. When you look at things like, for example, the effects of just having a massive force amplifier available to the general public, and the effects that it has on, for example, like suicide rates, like homicide rates and all these things. It just seems like generally it's not a good idea to have right now. Now, that's my like strong held position. When it comes to political advocacy in that regard, I feel like that's a bit of a different question because it's such a like entrenched part of American culture.
Mhm.
So you'll probably have to, if you seek to accomplish that goal, move towards more like I suppose mean tested trials of like gun control and stuff like that until you have a more sort of like progressive or movement of the Overton window to which like the abolition of the Second Amendment could actually be discussed in any meaningful degree.
Yeah, it'll
Now,
take about 80 years to enact any kind of meaningful gun buyback or whatever in America, just because of how long it takes for firearms to degrade and the vast cache of weapons currently existing. Like even if
yeah,
you
there's
outlaw
like more
every gun,
weapons than people in the
yeah.
U.S. It's some crazy shit.
Uh,
Um,
well, I mean,
so that,
anything. Well, if you think that with the right martial arts training, your whole body could be a lethal weapon. So of
mhm.
course, there's more weapons than people. We're just filled with ninjas. Um,
True.
no, but about 80 years to enact. And one thing that I always tell progressives, if they really want to like sink their teeth into this and enact some kind of meaningful gun control, the place
Mhm.
to start is pistols, not like big scary
Yeah,
assault weapons.
definitely. Like
Yeah,
AR-15s are like what was it, like 20 people or something? It was extremely small. Handguns seem to
yeah.
be the main perpetrators of homicide. Yeah.
And like I this is a point that I beat on frequently. But a large deal of the police violence that you see stems
Mhm.
from police being afraid of weapons that they cannot see, that are concealed. And you can't conceal a shotgun. You can't conceal an AR. Just any kind of long gun that you would use as a military weapon is very
Mhm.
difficult to conceal on your person in a meaningful way.
Mhm.
And I have long held that most of the most of the way that the police in the U.S. interact with people is informed by the fact that every time they walk up to somebody, they're like, in a tenth of a second, this guy can pull a pistol out of his jacket pocket and open
Mhm.
fire on me, and that changes the entire dynamic of how police talk with people. So
Yeah.
the second, just to remind everybody what the second part of his question was, there, he wanted to know about your view of the currently ongoing border crisis on the U.S. Mexico border. And
Yeah, so
not the border crisis with Canada, where they just won't let us into their country because we're rife with disease.
yeah. So when it comes to the Mexico-US border thing, I feel like um the even though this is gonna land me in some hot water with both like lefty communities and also um I would say to a lot of extent, like virtue signaling righty communities, President Biden has done certain, like changes and improvements to the policies of taking care of, for example, like unaccompanied minors at the border, which are pretty significant. Although there is still the cases of the conditions in which these, migrants are held at the border, which definitely need to be addressed, need to be invested in heavily, and need to be treated as a level of, humanitarian crisis and needs to be given utmost priority. I definitely believe that the United States easily has the means, the academic backing, the logistical efficiency to be able to handle like the immigrations at the current levels, fairly well and without issue. And as such, I feel like that's something that really needs to be, like focused heavily on when it comes to ameliorating the sort of pressure on the southern U.S. border as quickly as possible.
Fantastic. All right, let me oh, shit. People are blowing up my Tinder. Life is good. Um, so, the next one comes from I should be able to read. His, whole name is in Arabic, but Allah appears 4 or 5 different times, so this may not be a serious individual right here. But
Mhm.
he says, "Do you believe that being super straight is a real sexuality? If not, why do you think not finding trans people attractive is wrong? Isn't this just hypocrisy? So do me a favor, because I'm ancient, fill me in. What exactly is super straight? What the fuck is that?"
Yeah, I don't worry. I've made a video on this. I am prepared for this
Mhm.
topic. Okay.
Yep.
Basically, being super straight is a bogus sexuality invented initially on TikTok, but seems to have been co-opted by a lot of like far right communities such as 4chan, which basically says that you only feel a attraction towards the opposite gendered individuals who are also cisgender. So
Mhm.
basically, you're heterosexual, but only towards cis people. Now, there's a few things on this. One of them has to do with whether or not it's sexuality, and the second thing has to do with whether or not it's bigoted. So whether or not it has a sexuality is a fairly like open and shut issue. A lot of people don't recognize the difference, understandably, because we have shit sexual and gender education in educational institutions, even like here in Sweden. So I can only imagine what it is in the US. But the difference between a sexuality and a preference is whether or not it relates to gender or not. So, for example, let's say I just generally find certain phenotypical traits in black people less attractive than certain phenotypical traits on
Like a
average in
big
white.
ass? Is that what we're talking about?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
um,
Alright. So
would
let's
you
use
say?
that because that's what I wanna think about right now.
Okay, let's say that like all hypothetical situation, all black people just got fucking dump truck asses, okay?
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's something that you require for you to feel an attraction towards a person. Now,
Helps a lot, yeah.
would it be a sexuality then to say that you're only attracted to black people? Not really. That's not really what a sexuality means. That's more like a preference you have within a general broader sexuality. So you might be heterosexual
Uh-huh.
and you might have a preference for black people because they got massive dump truck asses, for example. So that's the difference between a sexuality and a preference there. So
Mhm.
a sexuality has to do with the relationship between your gender and the genders of the people you may be attracted to, or just specific, what's it called, specifications as for what genders you are attracted to. Now, for the second issue on whether or not it's like transphobic or bigoted, the real question you have to ask here is, from where is your desire not to date trans people come from? Where does it come from? So, for example, I'm going to go back to the race issue because it's pretty pertinent. It's a good allegory to use here. If, let's say, you just don't find let's say you don't find like white people attractive because like certain phenotypical traits
That'd
or
be
whatever, then
heartbroken.
that's
Yeah, why would they do that to me?
why would they do that? It's a phenomenal question. Then it's like, it's fine.
I
There's
mean,
like phenotypical traits. That's just like preference you have sexually. That's perfectly fine. But let's say you don't like white people because you think like all of them just eat, all of their meals with like a massive like bucket of mayo on all their food, and that they all smell like, lemongrass or whatever. Then it's like, okay, where is your, preference for not dating white people come from? Does it come from, like an actual like preference that is semi like intrinsic to white people, or does it come from like racial stereotypes in that regard? So when we look at trans individuals, then
yep.
even the original what's it called, TikTok that sort of like sparked this, the reason he stated for not finding an attraction to trans individuals is because he, quote, don't see them as real women, which is
Right.
a transphobic remark, and therefore his reason for being super straight is based on
Wait.
transphobia.
Okay, let me scroll back here for like a hot second, 'cause this is an area where I have some personal expertise.
Go ahead.
Um, have you ever had sex with a trans woman?
I have not, to my
Okay.
knowledge.
I have. And I can tell you from personal experience that on a very physical level, if we're just
Mhm,
talking nuts and bolts here,
mhm,
the actual experience, trans vagina is not the same as what I like to call old fashioned vagina. They're
mhm,
not the same at all. Literally every aspect of that experience is going to be significantly different. No matter what the surgery is or whatever, it is a fundamentally different physical experience.
mhm,
And just everything, like, on the level, on like the very most instinctual level of smell, that something is very different. Now, there are a lot of people who are attracted to this and so forth, but just on a physical level, I can tell you from personal experience
mhm,
that has been sustained through repeated clinical trials, they're very different.
mhm. Is there? Am I supposed to engage with that, or are you gonna ask like a question
I
to
mean,
follow?
you can absolutely engage with it if you feel
Mhm.
like following up there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
So one thing always to keep in mind when it comes to this is that I see what you're getting at, but we always have to keep in the back of my head that this is fundamentally like an anecdote. There's a wide different
yeah.
range of the different procedures and the effects it might have on the specific, I don't know, like functioning or whatever of
Can
individual
can we
genders.
can we accept that that I have had diverse enough experiences within that to categorically state that and I think we can just pull in just logic here too,
Mhm.
that an artificially created vagina will almost always feel different and function differently than one that an individual is born with.
Um, in a lot of ways, yeah, sure, but there's also a
Okay.
massive amount of variation within cis women's vaginas as well.
Oh,
That
believe me, I would 100%, I would 100% agree with that statement.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So
in a
if you look at
wonderful
like
way.
yeah, so if you look at like one of the ways, for
Mhm.
example, in which a higher amount of like trans people's vaginas may be different from like cis people's vaginas, a lot of it has to do with, oh, there's a term for this. Is it like the presence of like slippery substances? Fuck, there's a word for this.
Lubrication?
Lubrication, exactly,
That's what we're looking
and the
for, yeah.
way that
Yeah,
it
they
may be
don't
different.
self-lubricate,
Exactly.
in any way, shape, or form. Like, always to have, like, a positive experience, a large amount of
You need
lubrication is gonna be necessary, external
Yeah.
lubrication. And even in, say that you are one of these super straight individuals and so forth, I think that all of us can agree that, vagina, which successfully self-lubricates,
Mhm.
is more desirable than vagina that is incapable of self-lubricating.
Who knows? Maybe you're really into dry
I
sex. I
think
don't
we
know.
should move
Ben
on to the
Shapiro,
next
if you ask.
Alright.
question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, shit. Oh, that's right, we got the Discord cops in here. Alright, so let's move on. Sorry, I got, kind of, led astray on something that I'm personally interested in here. So let's
Interesting.
talk about, this is a good point to jump into Hood's question right here. Hood
Mhm.
asks, "What do you think about text censorship? Should we repeal Section 230 as prominent figures from both sides, including Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz?" He put Trump in apostrophes after, or parentheses after that for some reason, have called for. So a few different people are calling for the repeal of Section 230, and this is, this is a very fraud issue.
Mhm. So, a few things on this. So, repealing Section 230 as it functions today would in large part lead to, fundamentally the death of a lot of social media platforms as they exist
Mhm.
today. Now, there's a few different ways to touch on this. Number one, there is like a sort of level of hypocrisy with people who, claim to be capitalists who support this, but then start crying whenever these free, media platforms do whatever they want with their private platform. That's like one, pretty funny thing that often occurs when it comes to discussions like this. But when it comes to the questions of regulating like social media companies, 100%, I'm for that because social media companies are a pretty important and vital industry when it comes to their functioning right now in society as a whole. A lot of it may be required for just general like networking, for job applications, for like checking your personal history, for just being in touch with people. So social media right now feels a lot more of an essential piece of our current lifestyle than it did like I don't know, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whatever. And as such,
Mhm.
I believe that you should adjust for the negative consequences that come with a lot of the private incentives for retaining these, private media companies in that regard. So, what I mean by this, for example, is certain regulations of like maybe some form of like online bill of rights might be a good idea. However, when it comes to a lot of the things that conservatives are complaining about, when it comes to their will of like, repealing Section 230, is them being banned off social media platforms by virtue of them often, what's it called? Spreading or promoting some form of like bigoted rhetoric. And to this, I feel to be banned for that is completely acceptable because fundamentally, it makes the experience of using that platform a lot more hostile for the people that are often targeted by that rhetoric. And I believe that social media platforms should be accessible by as many people as possible. And that is not possible if you have sort of like an absolutist free speech on social media platforms, because eventually then more like hegemonic or bigoted views are going to often take hold, as we see with pretty much any like unmoderated social media platform or just internet space in general. So I think that certain regulations and certain like TOS requirements that exist right now are good, but then definitely we should enact certain regulations to prevent unilateral action by these by private companies, which may be harmful to to society as a whole and to consumers and citizens within a nation.
Okay. And just to break down, we should have done this at the start of the question, just broken down exactly what Section 230 is. But Section
Mhm.
230 is essentially uh, it defines providers of internet content as not being publishers and therefore not subject to libel law for what people post on their platforms. It's basically a broad based liability shield with the idea that these platforms are relatively content agnostic and just serving as a sort of neutral non-publisher. Critical in being a publisher is the selection process, like what you're going to publish and so forth. And they're just a little bit different under United States law. Let's move to our next question here. So that was Hood. Dragon Crash, who was very helpful in pinning many of these questions. So I'm happy to read their question off. Dragon Crash asks, "Are you an anarchist? And if so, why are you an anarchist?"
I am not an anarchist when it comes to like policy prescriptions, although when it comes to an anarchist frame of analysis, which the sort of cornerstone of that tends to be the abolition of as many unjust hierarchies as possible, I do find that an interesting analytical tool in achieving social change. So while I may not be, oh, like I'm an anarcho-syndicalist, I'm an anarcho-mutualist, whatever, like my policy prescriptions when it comes to economics aren't based in anarchist literature. The general sort of like ideological piece of analysis of trying to eliminate as many unjust hierarchies as possible, I feel is a pretty like commendable and principled goal that is often reflected in a lot of general progressive sentiments and policy suggestions. So that's the sort of main use I personally see in anarchism as an ideology. But I'm not like super, I suppose, tied to the literature, married to the idea of anarchism in the way that a lot of other people may be.
Okay. This is also from Dragon Crash. It's the next question here. And he wants to know what your position is on the use of bourgeoisie electoralism. To what extent is electoralism useful in the broader class struggle? Are other organizational methods like unions, debt collectives, cooperatives community councils, such as the Black Panther Party, etc., more productive for immediate change to balance the scales a little more with regards to power dynamics? This is a little bit of a confused question right here.
I think I
Um,
understand what I mean.
you get where he's getting at here? Okay, so
Yeah.
just to recap, he wants to know your position on the use of bourgeoisie electoralism.
Mhm. I think that both bourgeoisie electoralism and also sort of like direct independent actions should be used in conjunction with one another to achieve desired political change. You cannot do it's very difficult to do like one at the exclusion of other, and there's no reason to do one at the exclusion of other. If you're focusing exclusively on this or like bourgeoisie electoralism, then you're missing out on a lot of like direct utility that you can bring about through the more engaging in the more decentralized structures. And if you only work on the more decentralized structures, then you're missing out on certain, for example, like top-down policy proposals, which might make those type of actions a lot more, easy to complete, or also just unnecessary because that need might have been met in society. I think that engaging in both of these is very important when it comes to achieving the type of change you want. Achieving the kind of change you want in the world. And there's often pretty cool ways in which you can build a decentralized power structure that also engages frequently with bourgeoisie electoralism in order to sort of not necessarily lobby, but more enact sort of organized pressure on elected representatives in order to achieve the sort of changes you want. So yeah, both of them at the same time is super important, and is something that any person who wants to achieve political change should strive towards utilizing.
Okay, so if I'm going to summarize it for everybody who doesn't know what bourgeoisie electoralism in there, can I recap your point as being essentially you feel it is productive to use the existing power structure in addition to grassroots uprising to see your political goals through?
Yep,
Is that
exactly.
a acceptable simplification of that? Okay.
Mhm.
All right, cool. So from Ozake no Boshuko Shotu, hold on, about half of his. No, I think I got that about right here.
Mhm.
Hold on, They're asking if they can VC chat it here. Hold. Oh God, I'm gonna try and unmute this individual right here. Ozake, are you
Hello.
here?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah, please,
yes, I'm here.
please ask away.
Yeah, so basically, my question is like, can you separate like biographical information from the author's work for something? Like, let's say when you are reading an author's work,
Mhm.
do you have to take the biography into consideration, or do you think that the biography should be separated? Like, it just ruins the experience for you if you read the biography of an author, maybe you're going to change your mind about his case, something.
Yeah, I think
Great,
generally
thank
when it comes to analyzing somebody, thank you very much for the question, by the way. I think generally when it comes to understanding somebody's ideas, it's best to like prime yourself as little as possible before engaging with the ideas. Now, there's nothing wrong with, for example, doing research that might help you understand certain types of like vocabulary or phenomena that is described within certain given, pieces of literature, but you should try to prime yourself as little as possible. I'm always a big fan of the sort of like concept of being able to divorce an author or an artist from their work, and it's something that's often reflected in the way that I will often, for example, cite policies that may be held or may have been promoted by people I may disagree with a lot. Generally, when it comes to political things or maybe even like personal issues and stuff like that. But if the idea is good, then the idea is good, and you should be able to separate that from the sort of biography of the author in themselves. However, the biography of an author or of an artist can be important in understanding the sort of thought process as for how they may have arrived at their current idea. So through doing this, you might be able to be like, okay, I've read this entire idea. I sort of understand why it works. I feel like maybe there's something here I'm not quite getting. Like I don't get really like this jump in logic or how this really mechanizes itself and how this works. And if you then go and read up on the biography of the author and you find out that it ideologically like benefits them for that, mechanization to be kind of, iffy, then you can be like, okay, so this might be one of the more like critical flaws to it. Whereas if they might have an ideological predilection that is, often counter to that type of like logical leap, then you might be like, okay, maybe I've misunderstood this. You can go back to read more about it. So generally, you should be able to divorce the ideas of an author from the author themselves and their history. But their background and their history and their character can be a pretty useful analytical tool in order to properly understand their work and the way that it's utilized and employed.
Great, thank you. So next, we have a question from Nick Fuentes. Got blown the fuck out by Destiny, which is great. Uh,
True.
oh, is it true? Oh, great. I don't have to fact
I
check
think
it.
it's true.
So he asks, what do you think about cancel culture, doxing, and deplatforming? To what degree do you think that these are acceptable or unacceptable tools to attack your political adversaries?
So the thing about cancel culture is that I recently had a pretty interesting debate on this, in which I'm not going to necessarily change. I say I changed my beliefs a lot, but I garnered a strong understanding of nuance. So cancel culture, the underlying principle that is exhibited in what we today deem as cancel culture, is basically just a form of like public outrage, or a form of holding people accountable from a more like grassroots bottom up way. So there was an example that was given of somebody in Rome who was accused of doing a bunch of like horrible shit, and then before the day was over, they were basically like executed in public, and it ended up that they hadn't done anything.
Mhm.
That could conceivably fit within the current definition of cancel culture. I would say that the definition we have right now, cancel culture, focuses mostly on the sort of like 21st century social media usage of cancel culture. But the whole phenomenon and the underlying principle is something that's historically always been present and will most likely always be present as long as humanity exists. So I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with cancel culture. And because of this, because it's sort of like an underlying part of the human condition, it's an underlying principle that has been exhibited in every single instance historically of humans seizing some form of like societal structure. I think that the best way to look at cancel culture and the way that it's used in society is just to try to maximize it being employed in a responsible and in a just way according to your own like moral convictions, and try to minimize it being used in an irrational, illogical, or otherwise immoral way. And that's the best way to sort of like go about this, because the sort of like analysis of like, oh, cancel culture is this new thing, or we need to get rid of cancel culture, just kind of falls flat, and in some ways like betrays a misunderstanding in the real root cause behind cancel culture.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let me pop into the next question here, which is another one from Dragon Crash, who must be a big fan. Um, Dragon Crash wants to know, who is your favorite author? What is your favorite book and why? And if you read both fiction and nonfiction, if you wouldn't mind giving one from each category.
Oh no, I'm so bad at answering these questions when it comes
All
to
right,
my
then just
personal media consumption. I
let's
mean,
just
I mean, I
let's just
think
skip
for
through
this,
it.
it's like,
You,
um,
what I always ask when people like have that reaction to that there
uh-huh.
is, what is the last thing that you read or read that you just couldn't put down or that really had an impact on you?
um, the most, I suppose. Okay. This is a very difficult question. I always struggle an insane amount in answering these questions. I don't know. I just
Mhm.
have like a sort of perception that this is like a final answer of some sorts. But I
Yeah,
remember seeing, like, if I were to talk about one book that had a really long lasting impact on me,
yeah,
despite
absolutely.
it not being like very well known, is a book called, I believe it's called Stone Cold. It takes place in Britain, and it's basically about, if I don't remember correctly, a homosexual homeless person who struggles. It's about their struggles on the streets of London, and trying to find some form of like well-being or assistance. And there's a bunch of different like schemes and negative influences towards them. They end up being involved in a bit of like a criminal plot. And by virtue of being in an exposed group, so they're often taken advantage of by other people. And I just remember there were certain scenes, especially the final closing chapter, which filled me with like a sense um, of melancholic happiness over the fact that the story was so well constructed, but at the same time, the ending wasn't. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but the ending,
Please don't.
it wasn't like it's not sunflowers and rainbows really, but the whole book isn't sunflowers and rainbows, so it's not like an expectation that you might have for the ending of the book anyway. So I'm not really
Okay.
spoiling a
So,
whole lot.
just for people who are listening in here, are you talking about Stone Cold by Robert Swindells? This is a YA series, came out in 1993, about 132 pages long.
It may be that one.
Yeah, if you have a second,
The
like, I just want
cover
to
looks
get,
different to the
because I
one I
haven't read
have.
this before, and actually sounds pretty interesting. Here, the protagonist is somebody named Link, a newly homeless young man adjusting to his situation and shelter an ex-army officer scorned after being dismissed from his job, supposedly
I
on medical
believe that
grounds. Does that sound right?
that does sound somewhat right. Yes.
All right, thank you. All right,
These questions are so hard. These stress me out more than any political questions ever could.
you should just like, yeah, if you're gonna do a bunch of these, just have like a make a list of your 3 favorite things in every
Mhm.
conceivable category, and then just have your friends attack you for them so that you can stand them. But anyhow,
Great.
Cal asks next. He wants to know, what are your thoughts on Vaush? Would you describe yourself as a socialist or more of a social democrat?
Um, Number one, yes, I do like Vaush, mostly because he has done just like an objective overall benefit and good for when it comes to pushing like progressive lefty opinions on the internet as a whole. So, even though people may be able to point out individual character flaws or individual instances, I would still say that undebatably the aggregate effect has been positive. Okay. Um, would you
Excuse me.
disagree with that?
Yeah, but I'm sorry. That's not a good spot for me to laugh, so I
Uh-huh.
apologize.
No worries. It's all right. I'm prepared to be criticized for my positions.
Okay.
That's my general opinion on Vosh. What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, do you think of yourself more as a socialist or more of a social democrat, or do neither of those apply to you?
Yeah, so I typically stay away from identifying myself with a political model because I generally find it counterproductive because I purposefully do not engage in super like far-reaching theoretical economic models and attach those to my political identities. And the reason why I do that is because number one, it turns a lot of like moderates off immediately if they hear like, oh, like what is this person, what are they about? And they hear like, anarcho, mutualist, socialist, syndicalist, It's like, okay, dude. So I try to stick towards more like policies within the overtone window when it comes to that. So I tend to call myself a progressive, and I push for SOCDEM policies in the vast majority of countries across the world. And for in certain instances, for more like developed economies and developed countries, I want to see an increase in more socialist business structures, such as worker cooperatives. And the way I want to achieve that is through education on the viability of them as a model and just generally raising awareness about this as a business type, eliminating certain types of institutional discrimination or barriers that they face, often on either ideological or on grounds that are just based on just based on loaner discrimination from a like profit oriented incentive. So this could be ameliorated for example, like more government loans, preferential loans being given towards cooperatives. And yeah, I kind of touched on the third goal already, giving more preferential loans and encouraging the growth of worker cooperatives within society as a whole, so we can garner a larger sort of database from which to build on further, maybe longer term, like socialist policy prescriptions when it comes to democratizing the workplace and the economy as a whole.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let me pop here to our next question.
Mhm.
Give me 1 second. Apologies there. So, Saul, if you're in the chat real quick, I'm going to voice Saul, whose question I'm going to let him ask this one there quick. All right, Saul, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Please ask your question, sir.
Well, my question is very simple. And Rose, I would like to know what you think about Hitler.
I think he's pretty
Um,
cringe.
yeah, but do you think that, his rise to power was justifiable? Do you think it
What do you
can
mean by
be
justified?
explained, or maybe just, to relate it to our day today?
Mhm.
Do you see the writing on the wall for an ex-Hitler to come up? That's just my
Um,
question.
yeah, okay. So what you mean by justifiable? I'm a bit confused what you mean there. There's a lot of, like, misunderstandings as to exactly how he rose to power. He did garner a larger, share of the votes than during previous elections, and as a result of that, he was actually appointed to chancellor and sort of leveraged his chancellor powers to increase his political capital, and that's sort of how he got into power. So he wasn't necessarily elected like democratically, as a lot of people may, have you think. When it comes to the potential for like a new Hitler or whatever, I mean, whenever you have situations of economic downturns or economic recessions or economic crises, fascism tends to do very well in those environments. So, in a lot of countries right now, we do see those types of situations. And in those countries, yes, you're right to be worried about fascist uprisings within those nations. But yeah, I mean, the best we can do is try to bring material conditions to a point in which fascists don't have anything to scapegoat, don't have anything to leverage against the population as a whole, who are looking for simple answers to complicated solutions, and try to minimize the risk of a new Hitler.
I see, I see. Well, what I think is that, maybe people like you, should stop advocating for all this, cringe LGBT nonsense,
Uh-huh.
because I'm telling you, I just want to grill, I want to live in peace, and I don't want this whole Nazi communist garbage. And I think you guys should stop doing what you're doing now. I think you should stop advocating, for transsexual reading hours for kids, and
Mhm.
I don't
maybe
think either of
Oh
us
yeah,
maybe we
advocated
could
for
avoid
that.
next
Yeah,
chapter.
yeah.
Maybe we could
I have a
avoid
really
next.
strong question for this person. Can you? I'm super curious. Can you delineate the causal link between LGBT rights and Nazi communism or whatever strawman you decide to paint up?
I haven't
Well,
met a lot of
just
Nazi
just one
communists.
name, just one name,
Uh-huh.
Magnus Hirschfeld. Magnus
Uh,
Hirsch.
take, we'll take a gander at it. Thank you
That
for
is
your
not an
question,
answer to my question, but okay.
sir. I like the Nazi communists, though. That's a real double whammy right there.
Yeah, true.
Although I do want to thank Saul for his question, and I want to wish him Godspeed in his efforts to grill.
Hmm. Who is he grilling though? That's not.
No, no, no. He grilling is like sort of a metaphorical sense that all is right with the world, where you have like a big Monster Energy drink in your hand. Your riding mower is like going around your yard in circles, running
You got the
over
sunglasses on.
immigrant kids. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to go. All right, so let's pop. I'm glad we got that guy in voice. Very productive. So Dragon Crash is another question. And he wants to talk a little bit. He says, "What do you think about a new Cold War between China and the United States unfolding? Do you think the West has entered into a new Red Scare, so to speak?"
Um. Okay, there's a bunch of different things to talk about here. This is an extremely complicated topic. So, first of all, I there is definitely certain. You could even make the argument that certain of the patterns that originated from the Cold War, such as the Red Scare, for example, has definitely not worn off on American society. When you look at the educational institutions in a lot of the more rural areas, you literally see like Cold War propaganda still being taught. So I don't know how much of a different like it won't be if there's like
Can
an
you
escalation.
like on that specific point there?
Mhm.
Would you mind just giving an example of what you're talking about there,
Yeah. So,
and
for
where
example,
specifically you're saying that this is happening?
I'm sure a lot of Americans in the audience can recognize this because I'm not American myself, but I've seen a wide range of troubling academic resources and accounts illustrating that fundamentally when it comes to economics education or political education in America as a whole. There is an exceedingly few academic institutions that define the ideas that are socialist or communist or anarchist or anything as something that is not the government does everything all. That seems to be the like prevailing definition for these ideologies
Mhm.
throughout throughout like American throughout American like more of the elementary, middle school, high school institutions. There's even you've even taken a look at the textbooks there, and you see that they even have strong internal contradictions to kind of keep the idea that socialism and communism is like when the government does stuff, but also at the same time, if you do like a little bit of regulation, then is that socialism or communism? Well, no, that's just like free market reforms. Well, hold on, that doesn't really make sense. Like the level of education on these topics is exceedingly low and is not grounded in any of like the actual literature on the topic, and basically just like feeds an idea of a tyrannical state that aims to seize all of your resources and all of your assets and use it towards their own personal gains, which is a scary idea 100%. And that's why socialism and communism is often conflated with authoritarianism and a tyrannical state necessarily.
I just have to interject as
Go for it.
somebody who lives in the States. I don't think that that's an accurate portrayal of most of the and I'm as a substitute teacher. I don't think it's an accurate portrayal of most of the textbooks that are available. There will be fringe cases in certain areas, and there are a number of religious schools where they can use any crazy fucking textbook they feel like in the United States. But the vast majority of material that's provided to classrooms of I want to say grade 6 and above right there
Mhm.
doesn't deal with communism or socialism in that way. I just don't think that's an
So
accurate
if you ask
portrayal.
like an average like American student right now, or
Mhm.
just someone that's recently graduated, and you ask them, hey, like what is socialism? What's the definition of socialism? What do you think most of them would answer?
They would probably exactly as you said that it would primarily be where the state has a larger hand in administering things like welfare and so forth.
And what do you think that sort of like idea or concept comes from?
Where does the oh shit, I'm having the Socratic method used on me. Well, I think it's a reasonable perception of socialism. If we're going to like, I mean, if you're asking somebody on the street, you're going to get the least nuanced most immediate answer that you possibly can. What's the problem with that answer?
Well, the answer is that it wouldn't be based in like more of the economic and political literature on these very complex economic systems.
Mhm.
We can't just like be distilled towards like government doing stuff. Government doing stuff can literally apply to every single modern government in the entirety of the the world right now, right? By that, like where do you draw the line? At where there is enough government involvement that it suddenly becomes socialist and communist. It's a nonsensical definition. It doesn't hold any like value. It doesn't hold any like descriptive utility, and it's just generally used to leverage against socialist and communist ideas in order to sort of like fearmonger in the minds of the people who are subjected to that definition of it.
Okay. So we're relatively far afield of the intent of this question. Was
Mhm.
the development of well, I guess we got into a little bit of the Red Scare there. I don't want to beat this into the ground or whatever. So Patrick Bateman here is saying, do you think that the right currently lacks an intelligent person to idolize, which has led them to believe whatever thoughts that come to their mind, or are they inherently moronic?
This is an extremely simplistic question. I, I
I'm not sure that, I'm not sure.
I mean, I
So
will
he
agree that
has a
most.
follow-up question there if you want
Okay,
something that, has more teeth to it.
go for it.
He says, "Do you agree that Silicon Valley should be nationalized? Why or why not?"
So
So you can apply this to any specific, industry you feel like. How do you feel about nationalization of industry, for instance?
okay, so I think this definitely has to be done on a case by case basis. You have to weigh the potential benefits from competitiveness, which has to be assured through government regulations preventing the formation of oligopolies and monopolies. Because as opposed to a lot of other lefties who just see free market bad, there is definitely a lot of benefits that come with competition. You just have to make sure it's the right type of competition. However, in any form of like competitive markets or any form of market in general, there are certain types of market mechanisms or of economic fallout that these often do not address for perfectly. So whether it be, for example, market externalities when it comes to climate change, whether it be perverse incentives and rent-seeking behavior that comes from the profit motive, there are a bunch of different ways in which these things that are downsides to markets interact within nefarious ways with certain industries. And when it comes to Silicon Valley in particular, I haven't seen strong enough arguments that those types of externalities and adverse incentives have contributed a strong enough effect to make a case for it just being entirely nationalized. Right now, I'm leaning more heavily towards having it be strongly regulated to eliminate some of the like the negative behavior, to eliminate some of the oligopolies from forming, to bring about more competition in this regard. And yeah, that's sort of like where I'm at right now on that. More regulation than nationalization as of right now.
Okay. Uh, so, Hedret Ull asks, which of your YouTube videos are you most proud of, and what would you recommend for newcomers onto your channel?
Ooh, okay. So which one of my videos am I most proud of? So I've done a number of more sort of in-depth debunks. So I guess by extension, then it depends on what type of content the person who's watching me is really looking for. If you're looking for like well-structured, well-researched takedowns of certain videos, I can recommend a video I made on Swedish YouTuber Angry Foreigner on issues relating to immigration in Sweden. I can recommend a video I did on Paul Joseph Watson when it comes to mental illness and issues relating to that. Those are probably two of the main things I would recommend when it comes to
Were
more.
you condemning him for taking advantage of Alex Jones and his deteriorated mental state with the
I was not.
position?
Perhaps I should have done that. That was a phenomenal argument I should have considered.
Oh,
Um,
that's a shame. Poor Alex. He's having a
Indeed,
rough time at the moment
he
there.
is.
All right.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah,
And this
there's a
is
number of
another.
short videos.
Yeah. Did you have additional material in that question?
Yeah, I had a little bit more.
By yeah. Go ahead.
Then I have just general debates. I'm pretty pleased with a debate I had with a third positionist, which I suspect there may be a couple of those listening right now. Which is, the title for that video is "I think Mussolini was good: debating a Weasley Nazi," which I would recommend as well for like debate performances. And then I have a number of shorter clips which are just mostly there for the memes. One of them can be found on just my homepage on my YouTube. A pretty hard bullet that was bitten by somebody I debated quite a while ago, and then a video I published earlier this week, 2 days ago, about an exchange I had with popular Swedish YouTuber Angry Foreigner and how he is totally not mad. But yeah. those are going to be my recommendations.
Gotcha. And then Joshua Graham has a follow up there. He also says that ANCAP's equal to retards in his Discord name. He says, "What inspired you to start making content on YouTube?"
Um, So what I wanted really to do in YouTube is it's like a multifaceted reasoning process for this. So number one, I felt like doing YouTube and doing this type of thing gives me a lot of important skills and a lot of important practice to do the things I want to do further in my life, which is have some form of an effect on society as a whole in a way which I would deem would be positive. And I think that doing this and practicing my rhetoric and being pushed towards having like well thought out positions that I can defend in a good way is a really good like skill set that I can use in the future towards achieving my, like my personal goals in that regard. On top of that, I also feel like there is a sort of vacuum for the type of, more international progressive content. A lot of the most of the people we have right now is like progressives are like from UK or from the United States of America. We don't have a lot of people from other countries, and especially because I'm from Sweden, which who boy, the amount of stupid shit people say about Sweden is, incredible. I feel like I can do a lot of good there because I come with things from a Swedish perspective as well. So I felt that there was a sort of like space for me to fill there within a more like international policy view and in relating to bringing more localized views on politics as well beyond just like America and the UK as major political actors. And then also I find it fun, and I like giving people the arguments that they need to be able to defend their positions and to have most or better thought out ideas.
Okay, great. So CLSL, hopefully you're in the chat right here. He has a voice question to ask you right here.
Mhm.
So CLSL, are you with us? You may have wandered away right here. Well, this was your
Hey, am I
opportunity.
coming through?
There you are. Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear, friend. Why don't you ask your
Okay.
question?
Don't you, as a man, feel the natural masculine love for your nation, a repulsion to homosexuality, a desire for competition? Do none of those things go through to you?
No.
No. No, I love
If you're
all
going
of
to
those
make a
things.
bad argument,
To
I'm
the
going to
truth.
respond with a
Yeah.
bad answer. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, thanks for your question, CLSL. Godspeed. Good luck with the grilling. All right, what do we got here? Let's take our next question right here. So, yeah, shout outs. I usually don't do as many voice chats. So, shout outs to all these voice chat people here. So, this is another one where you can just say no if you feel like it. So, our Arabic friend asked, "Do you agree with Thomas Sewell's view that the only thing keeping Black Americans back is their culture?" Which, from what I've read so far, is probably just another no.
That's going to be a massive no. However, this is a better faith question that I can
Yeah.
actually try to substantiate a bit.
Yeah,
I mean,
by all
you can
means.
come at this from a series of different perspectives, right? You can come at this from number one, okay, so we agree that there are certain negative aspects within, like Black culture that exists in today in the United States of America. Where does that culture come from? How do we influence it? Yada, yada, yada. The result tends to be from strong socioeconomic factors, which means that there's something we can do about it. That's thing number one. Thing number two, when we look at it from like an empirical perspective and we look at the pressures that African Americans face today in the United States of America, we can see that there are definite third-party influences that predispose them towards having poor socioeconomic outcomes. So that's number two. And then the third thing is that if we just look at the history of Black Americans in the United States of America, we see that it's vastly different from all the other social groups pretty much in the United States of America. And since there hasn't been, enough ameliorations towards those past injustices, you will see, inequality and disparate outcomes being perpetuated today unless anything is done to address it directly. So yeah, and also Thomas Sowell is a pseudo-intellectual who his work is not generally very well respected among the academic community, especially not nowadays in a more modern context.
Okay. So Carnage X, I hope I'm reading that right. There's a bunch of X's and shit in his name. Had also heard that you did a racial bias paper or something. So his question is, do you believe the defunding of the police or similar reforms are effective and necessary or hurts communities as a whole? Is interesting. I'm interested to hear what you think about the trend in America for a defunding of police. And whether there are any similar movements happening in Europe that you're aware of.
Yeah. So When you look at, okay, there's, I guess, a bunch of groundwork I should do first. So, for those of you who may not know, defund the police is a stupid fucking slogan, because when you say it, people get the wrong idea of what it means. A better way to, run about, like a way of accurately depicting the policy proposal that defund the police, supports, would be reallocate funding and responsibilities from the police department towards other social structures. But that's
It's
not
not very
quite as
catchy.
catchy.
Yeah.
Exactly, as defund the police, which is why that's not, the prevailing slogan for these movements. Now, right now, we see a police force in the United States of America, which is in a lot of ways overfunded, which is also, most importantly, has too many responsibilities placed on it. The police are used for such a wide range of things in the United States of America, which we, for example, in Europe and Sweden, have more specialized departments to deal with. And because of that, because there are so many responsibilities on police departments right now, because they're set to deal with so many different societal ills, and because you often, don't have the education as a regular police officer to deal with all this, you tend to have more negative outcomes. So, you know what? I can do a bit more of, some market shilling here through specialization within the way society handles individual problems, through allocating funding towards different types of institutions, towards, like social workers, towards mental health professionals, towards social programs and stuff like that, and reallocating funding more in a more specialized manner, while also, taking away certain responsibilities from the police and giving them to other social groups along with the funding as well. You can see a less overworked police department and a society as a whole which has more specialized systems that are capable of addressing individual social problems as they arise on a more specialized basis, rather than having sort of this broad and bloated and an overworked institution try to tackle all of this at once, which tends to result in negative outcomes.
Fantastic. Okay. And then somebody just asked me, are you familiar with the works of Glenn Lowry?
No.
Okay. Well, that's an easy one there.
Sure.
All right. Then next up here, and this is a voice chat question. Let me see. Doom Shop, re-educate liberals. Let me take a look here. I'm looking for him. If you put a bunch of weird shit in front of your Discord name, it's hard to find. There he is. He's way down there at the very bottom of the sky. So Doom Shop, are you here to ask your question? So I'll give you a second. Doom Shop, are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, by
So
all
can I
means.
ask you
Please
now?
ask your question. By all means, yeah.
So you said that you're a social democrat. So what's your opinion on social democrats supporting the transnational companies which exploit third world laborers? And by that extension, how do you feel electing chauvinistic, racist, imperialist leaders who support these policies of social democratic exploitation of the third world laborer?
Doomshop, can you give a specific there because it's a very pointed
For
question.
example,
Can you give a
for
specific
example,
that we can go with?
for
Yeah.
example, for example, American socialists,
Mhm.
so-called socialists, promoting Joe Biden as the leader who just exploits the laborers of the third world country, and in the name of social democracy, it's shilling for capitalism.
Okay, so there are a bunch of different things to talk about here. First of all, you have people calling themselves socialists supporting for Joe Biden. I think that most of the people who at least adequately define themselves as socialists see Biden more as a as a preferable alternative over Trump, more than like an angle in itself. That seems like more of a reasonable characterization of their beliefs. Now, when it comes to the things about exploitation from the third world, I couldn't agree with you more that this is a massive issue that is faced by like social democracy, and that is faced by pretty much all forms of like liberalism when it comes to like market oriented policies. However, when you put it this way and you instead ask, okay, so we agree that this is a problem that exists right now, what do we do about it? If we were to just completely like close off all our borders and go autarky mode, then when it comes to like international trade from third world countries, then number one, the economy would see massive like issues. And I know a lot of people be like, the economy, yada, yada, yada. But the economy is extremely important when it comes to the well-being and being a predictor for the well-being of its citizens. So the economy will have a poor what's it called performance. The chances of wars will be increased because trade fundamentally is one of the best ways by which we can ensure sort of like a more peaceful global geopolitical environment, as opposed to if all the countries are relying on themselves, because if they're relying on each other, then they have less of an incentive to invade each other because you might disrupt the supply lines. So that's number 2. And when it comes to how we really want to solve, and number 3 is that if we completely cut off our borders, then even though there are massive issues of labor rights being violated in a lot of these developing countries, you could easily make an argument that, through at least providing them an opportunity to have some form of like economic development within those nations, that they would be worse off without it. Now, they were shit off in whichever situation, but there's still a comparative to be made here. But just because there's a comparative to be made doesn't mean that I support the situation which right now is marginally better. And the way I would ensure that we live in a society in which we gain the benefits of trade when it comes to diminishing the risks of wars, when it comes to improving economic productivity and output and efficiency, and when it comes to ameliorating struggles faced by third world nations in terms of like labor rights, the best way to do this is through more globalism, baby, through proper multilateral trade agreements that have strong conditions on like requirements for participation within these trade unions. So things like, for example, saying that, having like large economic powers with, generally progressive values on labor rights come together and be like, hey, you know what? The only way you're going to get access to our markets is if you enact these, this, and this, and this labor rights laws or whatever. And also, these countries can also give levels of grants in order to help them ascertain these goals. And if they do not strive towards ascertaining these goals, towards improving these conditions for their workers, well, then they're going to be locked out of that market and they're going to lose a bunch of their exports, which is going to have negative effects on their governments and their countries as a whole. So yeah, it's a shitty situation 100%, but we got to look at this from a solution-oriented perspective. And when it comes to a solution-oriented perspective, multilateral trade agreement seems to be the best way by which to keep all the positives from global trade while ameliorating the negatives.
Yeah, but can I give like my
Yeah,
opinion
please follow
on
up. Yeah.
something you said?
Yeah,
Thank
go
you
ahead.
very much. So like you made 2 points that one, it is okay to exploit the labors of other countries as long as your people are getting benefited from it through economic lens. So using the same analogy that my people should benefit off of other people's labor, we can also say that the Nazis were right when they used Jews for Jews labor, forced labor, to better the life standards of Aryans or their own people by your same logic. And other is that you want to make these first world countries imperialistic in their nature by actually implementing what they seem fit throughout the whole world, which is what exactly neocolonialism is. Don't you see that this is actually very, very bad for
Okay,
the
can I get to
global
this? Because
community
this
as a
brings
whole?
up
Yeah,
two
yeah.
things.
Answer
Okay,
question.
so number one, the first thing you talked about with you using like my logic, that's a mischaracterization of what I very clearly said. What I very clearly said is I do recognize that there's negatives being perpetuated right now into the way trade operates, but I would also see the fact that if we were to just completely withdraw from all of these nations and rob them of all this economic like productivity, then they would probably be worse off today than they were beforehand. I don't know if you would agree with that. I can ask you simply yes or no to see if I can build off that. Do you think these developing countries would be better off if we just cease to trade with them? Yes or no?
If by trade you mean exploiting their labors, then I say they're not.
Do you think they would be better off if we stopped trading with them? Yes or no?
I'd say yes. You'd be better. These countries will be better off if they built their own industries on the
With
basis
what
of
money?
their own
With what
resources.
resources?
The resources which every country has. For example, African nations have plenty of resources within itself, but they're just inhibited because of the neocolonial policies of the first world countries.
Okay, the assertion that these countries would just be able to just like build themselves up should we completely withdraw from them just doesn't seem to be substantiated in the way that we know economic development to take place. We know that economic, like what's it called, just general trade on just terms is extremely important for towards like garnering this sort of economic resources and capital within a nation to be able to enact the type of policies that they need to develop further. That's point number one. I would say that I guess that's where I guess your issue with understanding my logic is, because you have a like mischaracterization of the situation that these countries would be in should we stop trading with them that is fundamentally different from mine. Fundamentally, the best way for us to help these countries would be through enacting more like just trade agreements with them and some extent of like neocolonialism and like trade powers. If that's going to be some form of like soft implicit power, well then yeah, there's no way you're going to be able to rid yourself from like soft implicit powers when it comes to like trading blocks ever when it comes to human society. There's one argument that can be made there which is more direct, which has to do with like direct invasions of countries. But if you're going to characterize just like locking people out from like economic markets as like colonialism. That's going to be extremely difficult to like leverage any form of international power when it comes to trading blocks ever within the future. And the sort of characterization that these countries can just like build themselves up from the bottom up, with the ways that their infrastructure is focusing right now, without the economic generation of like international trade, just doesn't seem to be based in
Rose Wrist, can I ask you, why can't they do it? Do you think these people are deficient in how they are as people, that they cannot do
I
it?
think
Because
if you
the
literally
USSR,
switched out the
because
population
wait a
of
second, because USSR certainly did it.
wait, sorry.
Yeah, can you repeat
Okay,
that
hold
real
on.
quick?
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, we
okay.
couldn't hear.
I heard what you said. Okay, if you're going to compare the USSR and the massive top-down authoritarian policies that they had on a country that had massive amounts of natural resources that are pretty much unparalleled when it comes to making comparative examples to other countries, and using that as a formula by which to suggest developmental policy from the world as a whole, that's just it just doesn't make sense. The USSR was fundamentally like based on extremely high levels of natural resources being present within the nation in the first place, and being in a unique geopolitical position that just simply doesn't exist right now today. And also,
I
if
won't
you
take. Thank
characterize
you
the
very much.
USSR as anti-imperialist when it comes to the things that they did to the other countries that definitely contributed to their economic growth, then boy, would you be wrong.
I don't think he made that point.
Uh,
Doom, we're gonna have to wrap up here. Are you
Sure.
satisfied with his answer?
Thank you very much. I would
Yeah.
give time to others as well. Thank you for
Okay.
engaging.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Honestly, like, led to a lot of really interesting discussion there. Yeah. Let me pop to our next question here. I do want to get to everybody there. So choose Christ would like to know your opinion on Brexit.
I think it's cringe. I think that there's multiple issues with this. Number one, the premises underlying it that people made arguments from, which is basically them saying like, "Oh, we're going to be funding our NHS much better, our economy is going to function better, yada yada yada," just haven't been demonstrated. Number one, and number two, just don't make sense on a logical level when it comes to stripping yourself from economic engagement with the European Union as a massive like financial like institution in a union. The tariffs that are going to come with that and the trade blockages is just going to lead to like a decrease of comparative advantage when it comes to your trade, and just a general decrease in economic efficiency and productivity. On top of that, while there are definite issues with the European Union, the UK is probably the last country that should be complaining about those injustices. They were actually in one of the most privileged positions within the European Union beforehand. But yeah, that you should make changes to the European Union. The European Union should absolutely be reformed. But just generally, it doesn't seem like it's a good policy from a consequentialist perspective.
Let's talk about while we're on the topic of the European Union. Do you think that Turkey will join at any point, or is that completely off the table with Brexit?
Um, what I think about Turkey and them joining the European Union is I feel like it's a strong opportunity because Turkey obviously wants into the European Union, right? Because of the economic benefits that it brings. So right now, what I would see is the thing I described previously is the European Union leveraging its trade power and saying like, hey, as long as you're doing these disgusting things to, your domestic population, to the Kurds, the war that you're fighting with the Kurds right now in Rojava and all of that, then we're not going to let you in until you address these human rights issues and injustices that are taking place there, and sort of therefore enacting soft pressure on these countries to encourage them not to do that stuff.
Do you think it would be possible prior to the establishment of some kind of Kurdistan or a separatist movement eventually occurring for the Kurds, or will there just be too much turmoil until something like that happens?
For me, predicting possible outcomes to that conflict would be extremely difficult. I don't feel like I have the information they
I
sort
think
of
it's fair.
perspective on
It's a tremendously fraught region. Okay, an easier question from Mango here. Mango wants to know, what do you think of Da Baby, Let's Go, and U.S. hegemony? So I don't know how they relate to each other, but
When it comes to that baby, I don't know. I've heard they have some pretty good instrumentals. I haven't listened to much of their music, but yeah, that's my take on the baby. When it comes to US hegemony, I'm just gonna Google just to make sure this means what I think it is.
it does mean what you think it does. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, generally, no, I'm not in favor of just having unbalanced like military, like what's it called, military powers around the world. Generally, I'm in favor of a more, I suppose, like collectivized military strengths along the lines of trading blocks. So, for example, one of the things I may be in favor for the European Union would be having a collective EU military rather than all of the individual countries having their own military, and as such, you kind of like balance out the playing field when it comes to like military strength across the entire nation, across the world as a whole. Sorry, but given current geopolitical the current geopolitical situation, I prefer the US to have strong military right now. When you look at, for example, the stuff that China is doing at the time, just to have some form of a balance there. But ideally, I would see just a general de-escalation of military strength all across the world and a more collectivization of military structures to reduce the risks of conflicts and to also make issues of national defense more efficient, where every single country has to invest less in the militaries because it's done more on a collective basis.
So Jira asks, what book or other material would you recommend to better understand your point of view? So this is another book question, but hopefully like a little bit more foundational one. If you don't have one off of the top of your head, you can talk about reference sources that you use when creating your arguments.
Yeah, so I have actually not read a lot of like books when it came to forming my beliefs. Most of it came from a more like contemporary perspective when it came to like literature that I've read and engaged with in certain topic and studied material yeah, academic literature. So most of the time I don't really have like one source where I get my literature from. Typically when I want to form an opinion on a topic, I have like a little I have actually a video up on my channel on how I typically form my opinions about something and the sort of research that goes into it. So what I typically do is I first take a look at existing what's it called, like compilations of research on a given topic, and then look at like the general gist and the general consensus that seems to suggest. Wherever there are gaps in my knowledge from the research I'm presented with through the existing compilations of data, I independently seek out. The way I typically do this is through using programs such as, for example, Google Scholar. And also, even though articles suck, articles typically tend to reference a specific study or first-hand source, which you should check out there directly and not have it be, digested through the words of the person writing an article. And then from there, I sort of like fill in the gaps. And then I tend to, like compile them in a form of document of sorts to ensure that my understanding is comprehensive enough and that I'm easily able to find information on things that I'm referencing.
Then we perform a bit of jesting. Says, do you think your country has done well in regards to its progressive laws and culture? Which is a pretty open-ended
Mhm.
question there. Um, and you can extend it out to, do you think they're doing well now? Do you think they will continue to be doing well 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 60 years from now?
Yeah. So I feel like in Sweden, the heart is in the right place, but I don't feel like there's been the proper the proper like efficiency and competency to be able to back it up. So I was surprised that it took this long to actually get a question surrounding like issues relating to Sweden and culture and most likely immigration as well when it comes to stuff like this. The primary issue we face right now when it comes to Sweden is not necessarily the like the social values we hold or the progressivism, but it has to do with an infrastructure system which is suffering not on the basis of just like intrinsic inefficiencies or intrinsic issues faced by these form of like infrastructure systems or welfare states, but rather just an issue of competency, being able to analyze issues within Swedish society and how to ameliorate them. So this is something that I've done a special amount of research on. I have another document similar to the Documenting Systemic Racism in the United States of America document called Examining Discrimination and Immigration in Sweden, in which I take a look at the current issues, like faced by Sweden when it comes to more like the cultural, social issues that we face, when it comes to labor market integration, when it comes to, for example, like ghettoization, segregation within like housing and within education and stuff like that. And then at the end, I propose a number of policy prescriptions that we should enact in order to be able to reach the goals that we seek to achieve through more just general progressive like ideological goals, which I'm in favor of. So things like this would include just generally having a more open discourse about things like discrimination and bias we face, especially along racial lines here in Sweden. Right now in Sweden, we have a very, very, very colorblind, in a detrimental way, view of race. There is plenty of research suggesting right now that there exists indications of structural and systemic racism within Sweden, but we don't ever talk about that in that way. We may call individual things racist, but we don't have the same systemic and structural discussion about racism as you do in the United States, for example. The United States is ahead of Sweden in this regard. We also have issues in relating to housing, which directly leads to segregation, and therefore issues of like cultural cohesion and stuff like that. We have an awful education system, which has been privatized over the past few decades, which has led to even further segregation and dropping school results. And in Sweden, the number one predictor of crime is educational attainment. So yeah, education is pretty important there. And then we also have a bunch of different like policies relating to integration and how to make the integration systems more efficient. Things like, for example, follow-ups, better credential translation systems, countering labor market discrimination, the expansion of the labor office, wage subsidies, and just a general increase in the integration programs that we have right now in Sweden, as well as just other things that will have large downstream effects, such as legalizing cannabis, will have massive effects on, for example, like criminality and the presence of like segregation and of like gang violence, for example, in Sweden.
Okay. So the Yuckster has a solid question here that I'd like to take a gander at here. He says, being more than 5 days since the implementation of affirmative action, haven't we made enough progress with this? And do you feel that we've made progress with it? And hence, should we get rid of it and implement other inequality easing measures? If so, what measures would be superior to affirmative action?
I think affirmative action still has its role in certain aspects. I think that the thing that most people are upset about is affirmative action being implemented in a inefficient way, which not only doesn't lead towards the best results, best outcomes, but also is perceived as more like unjust in the way that it just generally functions. Um, on top of that, I think that the real solution to the ills that a lot of people face right now with affirmative action, in them saying like, oh, just because you're black doesn't mean that you've had it harder than, like a poor white person or whatever. The way I would seek to ameliorate that would be, rather than getting rid of all affirmative action, which would just, like sort of like perpetuate or keep the socioeconomic divides we have right now in this country, is have a more expansive and diverse view of affirmative action, in which we have certain affirmative action programs for people for, based on like economic condition, some of them based on like racial lines, some of them based on geographical location, some of them based on previous educational attainment, some of them based on the socioeconomic conditions of their parents, and sort of having a more comprehensive view of affirmative action. But number one, affirmative action is more of like I suppose, like a band-aid and something that alleviates an issue rather than solves it. And the way by which you solve a lot of the issues that affirmative action seeks to, address in the short term is through addressing these massive issues of like long-term generational wealth gaps and structural injustices that exist right now that perpetuate the sort of disparities in socioeconomic condition between different, social groups in the United States of America today.
Okay, great. So then, underneath it, at the risk of reigniting an earlier controversy,
Oh, no.
Deakins,
Oh
he
my
says,
God.
asked Rose Wrist what gender abolition means to him and why he supports it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Deakins asked this question. He said that we are friends.
Okay, so here's the thing about Deakins, okay? I'm sorry, if you're gonna go into the politics thing and ask questions, I'm gonna fucking tell the whole story, okay? So basically, this person is a person that has been kind of like been bothering my general community and me, myself.
I was a
on
troll.
Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of, exactly. He's been there frequently, and today, he kept, what's it called? He kept aggravating. He made a tweet yesterday, which he just like quoted ad verbatim.
Oh, I saw him get banned on your
my
YouTube
chat.
live, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Got that. And then he was saying things like, oh, let me know when you want to have me on and I'll destroy you on whatever position you want to talk about. And then we come on and talk. And it's one of an extremely bad display, in my opinion, which is perfectly fine. If you want to come on and talk to me and you aren't extremely confident in like your rhetoric or in your ideas, you just want to kind of test the waters, that is perfectly fine. Love you. Okay. Wonderful. We can have that conversation. Chill. But if you're going to be like, I'm going to fucking destroy you, you're like, intellectually, fallible, you're like dishonest, you yada, 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 yada. And then you come on and you have like a completely awful performance and you bomb. And then you drop out from the debate by just saying, oh, I got to go and just hang up. I'm sorry, but you're gone. Okay. You're fucking
going
going
to get zapped? Oh, no.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
you can come back in 6 months, which is when I'm going to ban you. Hopefully there's been some changes there, but yeah, I can
Are we
answer
going to
this
have to do a montage to like work up to your level to get into a Discord debate with you?
Perhaps. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with wanting to test that ideas. That's perfectly okay. I don't mind it. But if you're gonna talk smack, you better have the rhetoric to back it up. That's all I'm trying to say here. But I can still answer their question, because it's even though the question wasn't asked in good faith, I can still ask it because it's still an interesting question. So, what gender abolition means to me is basically an elimination of the social structures or the social concepts or identities that we have right now. The genders basically. And the reason why we might want to do this is because I like, the freedom for people to express themselves in whatever ways they want, and try to minimize the sort of social influences upon those like expressive behaviors. So it's a super long-term goal, probably going to take like, like centuries, at the very least decades, to be able to accomplish. But right now, it's not something that is like strongly advocated towards. Right now, generally, I just stand for like expanding gender roles as much as possible to decrease instances of like coercive behavior being employed on someone on account of their gender, and also trans ideology, which he liked to talk about a lot, which is basically just a series of like medical and psychological practices that we have in place right now to account for the existence of trans individuals.
Oh, hold on just a second. Yeah, let me find out. Is that on your end or on my end? Oh, hold on. Let me mute this character real quick. That's on my end there. So yeah,
Nice.
just somebody who had forgotten that their microphone was on there, and I have muted them there. I like that the troll is following into this discussion right here. Okay, let me pop to our next question here. We're actually getting like a bunch. This is going better than I thought it would. after
Okay, well, wait,
after
I'm curious.
after the nib. All right, so uh, I am mispronouncing this name. It seems like it's somebody from your community, Nebojja. What is that little crescent over the S? What sound does that make? Do you know?
Phil Crescent, I'm not quite sure what
All
symbol
right,
you're talking
so Nebojja says, how does one even push for progressive ideas in a predominantly conservative area like the Balkans? I feel like a piece of shit because I don't know how to say this user's name, but in so in areas like the Albania and the further east you get on that trajectory, do you find yourself in like halfway to Afghanistan, it's extremely difficult to hold progressive views. And in a lot of cases, people might not feel like they can express them in any way, shape, or form. What would be your advice to people who hold these progressive ideals, but they live in an area where they feel like it's hopeless or it's not safe to espouse them?
Yeah. So this is obviously a very broad question where my answer would depend heavily on like the specific like like conditions of the space
So
that you're
he's talking
talking
about
about.
he's talking about the Balkans.
Mhm.
So if do you have a general idea of how socially permissive people are in? I just always think of
Not very.
Albania when I think of the
Yeah.
Balkans because they're number one.
Mm.
But you could think of Serbia, um, just anywhere in that area if you're familiar with it. If not, I can give you a general approximation.
Yeah, I mean, I can give like general what's it called, like prescriptions when it comes to pushing for like progressive political change in a hostile environment. So, um, coming back to the fundamental principle that we established before in this conversation, which was bourgeoisie electoralism or like decentralized action. What should we do? Probably both. So, number one is a fairly obvious one: do what you can when it comes to being able to vote. If there are any progressive parties, available, vote for those. Try to find like local communities that may be more progressive and sort of like build off of them. Find people that you can connect with. It can be either like in through physical interaction with the people around you and trying to try to like suss out who's like progressive or whatever, which might be pretty difficult, or through online social groups where you're able to like interact in like in a less high risk environment and try to make progressive contacts within like your region through that sense. But when it comes to these like very large things, it's very difficult for like an individual specifically to like bring about a paradigm shift in the larger sense. But you should do what you can depending on how safe it may be for you personally, for your own like safety, for the safety of your job, for the safety of your well-being, pushing through for your beliefs through just general like conversations, often in a very charitable way and in a very calm way, rather than from like a super like strong hardline defensive argumentative framework, is probably like a good way to bring about things. Just creating more of like a passive thought process within individuals rather than trying to enact a radical like change in perspective from one conversation is a pretty good way to bring about like change within like individuals in that regard. But that would generally be my prescriptions. Do whatever you can in the bourgeoisie systems, or electoral systems. Bourgeoisie electoralism is a mouthful. Do whatever you can within the electoral systems. Try to locate local communities that share your values and check what they have for long-term goals or like local goals or whatever to try to like push for their politics. And also interpersonally, as long as it's safe for you, try to bread pill the people around you with your beautiful progressive ideals.
Did you say bread pill?
Yeah, I don't know. I just
Ugh. All
I'm
right, so
completely.
Sid,
It's completely understandable if you kick me from the AMA at this point. I'm just saying. Okay.
I'm just gonna vomit. Sid asks, "What's your opinion on Nick Fuentes' AMA here, and the tolerance of intolerance paradox?" We get this every single AMA. Should
Yep.
opposing or politically or potentially dangerous ideas be platformed and tolerated, or should they be deplatformed, never granted one in the first place?
So when it comes to Nick Fuentes one, I'm sorry to offend anybody here. I didn't watch it, so I don't know how you handle it. So it's hard for me to talk about like the consequential outcomes of that specific AMA there. When it comes to like platforming people, with like views that are actively like anti-democratic and that hurt freedom of speech, that's the whole paradox of tolerance meme. It depends very heavily on who is platforming them and who is and if there's going to be adequate challenge towards their perspective. If you know and you can substantiate and you have reason to believe that you're able to properly challenge this individual and genuinely like make their ideas look poor, then yeah, sure, a platform might be good, assuming that this person had a fair share of influence immediately. It wouldn't be beneficial for, let's say, a massive like progressive political person to like talk to like a tiny Nazi and like platform their ideals. That's probably not the best idea, because even though even if you perform flawlessly in that discussion, you're still going to lead to an overall increase in the people that are exposed to this person's beliefs, and therefore have an aggregate negative effect, most likely, on the likelihood for the retention of freedom of speech within your country in the future. But yeah, generally the paradox of tolerance is completely fair. Tolerate all opinions except for those that strive towards political ambitions that make it impossible to tolerate other opinions that don't align with their own. And yeah, it's a lot on a case by case basis. It's hard to have like a really like solid rule for always do this or always do that.
All right, and so I got a breaking news update. It's
Oh.
Nubusha. Yeah, which is actually kind of beautiful in its own way there. Shout out to Nubusha. And I'm sorry that I'm still mispronouncing your name. Okay, so Patrick Bateman really needs to know the answer to this. He wants to know, what's your favorite song on Kanye's album Yeezus? Now, are you
I
well
don't.
known as a fan of Yeezus or Kanye?
I have. I don't think I listened to like one Kanye song in my life. I don't listen to
You're not
Kanye.
missing anything. Okay,
Okay.
let me make sure. So the next one is from our Arabic friend here. I should really be able to read Mish. All right, I just can't do it. God, my Arabic has gotten so shitty. So he says, does the current situation in Myanmar change your view on the Second Amendment? They're in a situation where there's essentially a military junta in
Mhm.
control of the country, where a lot of people are wishing now that they had weapons with which they could defend themselves and try to overthrow what is increasingly an autocratic regime that is doing tremendous damage to civilians. Um,
Yeah.
how do you square that with your view of? I mean, can we get a um, can we get nailed down? Do you feel there should be any civilian ownership of firearms?
So that was an important caveat that I mentioned at the beginning when I
Yeah,
talked about it, that it
yeah,
depends on the conditions and the environment and the technological advancement of whichever society you're talking about. I said before that I believe that currently the United States of America, when it comes to technological and military advances, has advanced past the points where I believe like the aggregate, possibility for the guns to be able to be used towards a potential insurrection against an authoritarian state is, like the likelihood of that having any meaningful effect is outweighed by the negatives that are brought about by just having like gun ownership in general. However, when it comes to the conditions of less technologically advanced, less militarily powerful nations, such as, for example, Myanmar, there is a better argument to be made there about retention of firearms by the everyday, by civilians. So I would lean towards in Myanmar saying, yeah, probably it can be valid for them to have gun ownership. But for me to give a conclusive answer, I would have to do specific research towards Myanmar. I can say right now for the United States of America, probably not worth it. For most European countries, probably not worth it. For Myanmar, yeah, sure. It seems from what I know about them that, yeah, gun ownership could be overall a consequentialist positive in that perspective.
I mean, if we follow that logic, then essentially we need to arm a vast majority of Africa, where their governments are destabilized to the point where a coup in some places is an almost certainty. Um, I mean, to what degree would you
Mhm.
support civilian ownership throughout places? Uh, let's take Rwanda, for instance, or present day Libya.
Mhm.
Should we be arming these people, or are they on their own?
So,
To
yeah, sorry if I cut you off. Was there anything else you wanted to
no,
say?
no, 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 go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So when it comes to stuff like this, for like saying like, would it have been good for Myanmar to have a Second Amendment? Probably. And being like, okay, what do we do about it at this point? Those are two like pretty like complex questions, and have like pretty like not different sets of answers, but have more nuanced answers. So, for example, how would one go about like arming a massive amount of the civilians within an authoritarian state, in an effective way that isn't just like seized by the authoritarian government, or that doesn't inspire preemptive action by the government to prevent the implementation of this program or stuff like that. So when it comes to the application of this principle, it's pretty difficult, and exactly like how you're to apply it to these different nations, and it would obviously depend on the on the conditions of that nation in specific, and what would be the best possible way by which to bring about the desired outcome of, for example, let's say you want to arm the population. On top of that, there is also a set of like other solutions that may be more pertinent to the situation of these countries individually, such as, for example, I think you mentioned like Libya, for example, where those other solutions may be more effective solutions, like right now in the short term, by which to ameliorate these conflicts. So that's also something that needs to be considered in these respects. But yeah, I mean, generally, when it comes to unstable nations, then some level of gun ownership among the civilian population is definitely, like, I think as a principle, is something that is probably like a good idea in more cases than not.
Okay, great. So Carvo asks to jump the line here. He's too tired to
Oof.
keep waiting for his question to be answered. But anybody who has additional questions, please try to get them in and post them in the channel right now. I will try to do a sweep. We lost our person who was pinning questions, so I'll try to do a sweep through the channel for more stuff. But Carvo's question was, if educational outcomes and criminality were proven to have an innate basis, how would that change the policies that you advocate for?
If education and criminality?
If if educational outcomes and criminality were proven to have an innate basis, how would that change the policies that you advocate for? So essentially, he's in
Oh,
a
okay,
yeah.
innate.
Do
Okay,
you
yeah,
get his question?
yeah,
Yeah,
I get his question.
it's
So
like
this,
a roundabout. Well, it's sort of a roundabout way of saying, like, if what if black people actually are bad?
yeah, exactly.
To
Yeah.
surmise. Yeah.
The answer to this is, I was actually kind of preparing for this in case I would be challenged on like race realist talking points here, is that it wouldn't change anything. We do know, no matter what, that people's general like performance within society, people's likelihood to engage in criminal behavior, people's level of educational attainment depends on their socioeconomic condition. Now, regardless of where their, for example, like cap is, or where how like how strong their ease of learning is, that still doesn't detract from the fundamental principle that I believe that we should give every individual the tools that they need to achieve, what's it called, like their peak, to achieve the most with their personal potential. And yeah, as a result of that, even though there were to be like strong innate drivers behind these that are significant, it still wouldn't change my overall policies of attempting to allow each individual to reach their maximum potential.
I think that's totally fair. All right, so the Yuckster has 3 questions for you here.
Oof, nice.
Question. Let's hold on. Let me take a look. Let's look at all 3 of these and then pick one of them.
Mhm.
Question 1: is a good way of combating the current disdain and hatred towards critical race theory, asking universities to complement this with an anti CRT. So he's asking if critical race theory should be paired with a counterpoint or requiring conservative studies to make it more palatable. This question, too, is do you hold a positive opinion on Warren Farrell, known notably for his role in feminist movements, but it is also his novel Why Men Earn More? And then his third question is do you think the media has over centralized mass shooting gun issues, seeing that the percentage of people affected by these tragedies are statistically insignificant? Can you repeat? And I think we went into gun control um, kind of in depth right here. So, of the two questions at the verse, do you think it's smart to pair critical race theory with its counterpoint? And if you want to talk about William Warren Farrell, you can do that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to like critical race theory, it's probably you know we might disagree with this, but along with like socialism, communism, one of the most misunderstood just academic concepts right now in the United States of America. So like critical race theory is not a set of like policy prescriptions or anything. It's more just like an analytical tool. Having issues with the outcomes of like critical race theory or like the sort of like implicit policy suggestions would be like being mad at like algebra as a field of study just because you get like a math result you don't want, right? The system inherently or the analytical tool has value in itself, and I don't really know what would be like a counter analytical tool to the one you already have. Like what's like the counter to like algebra, for example. It's pretty difficult to sort of conceptualize it. It's just like one extra analytical tool, one extra what's it called, societal, I suppose, like narrative or way to explain social conflicts, which can be taught in a good way and can be taught in a bad way. So as for the ways that I would like recommend, critical race theory to be implemented when it came to educational programs or stuff like that, or possible changes to how it operates right now, is just to ensure to teach it in a useful way that is conducive to public discourse, that actually effectively encompasses the key tenets of it and doesn't extrapolate a bunch of other principles which are like tangentially related or are taught in a way that generally what's it called or that like when taken at face value from a lot of like laymen may seem to like imply a understanding of the world which it doesn't. So yeah, I don't know what the conservative counter to critical race theory would be. The main way I would just say, when it comes to teaching critical race theory, is just to do it in like a reasonable and in a way that's like optically proficient, and that also is maybe that effectively encompasses it points and doesn't extrapolate anything beyond that. When it came to Warren Farrell, Warren Farrell. I was thinking of the actor. Wait, who was I thinking? I think of some other
I
guy
was
by
thinking
the
of
name of
Will Ferrell,
exactly. Oh my
who is
god,
himself a brilliant intellectual, but no,
indeed.
actually, he's terrible. But
Yeah. Oh, okay. That just clicked for me. Oh my god.
yeah,
Okay.
so he's asking. Let me repeat the question because it's been a little bit here. He says, "Do you hold a positive opinion on Warren Farrell, who is notably known for his role in feminist movements, but also his novel Why Men Earn More?"
I think that a lot of the descriptive and analytical tools or descriptive analyses laid forth by Warren Farrell are decent. The key thing that I often disagree with a lot of these people is an issue of like putting it in a like general cultural perspective, and also the prescriptions that tend to follow off of that. With a lot of these people, yeah, their descriptive statements are really good. There are a lot of issues that are faced disproportionately by men in societies, issues that are intrinsically related to how it means to or like what it means to be a man under a patriarchal society. And there are definite negative consequences that come from this when it comes from mental health, when it comes from like the ability to express affection, when it comes to likelihood of engaging in harmful behavior such as gambling and criminal behavior, when it comes from like your ability to retain children in what's it called, like family courts and stuff like that. These are all ways in which men are significantly hurt, and also just like the way that the gender role of women has expanded and what it means to be acceptable to be a woman has expanded so much, but with men it hasn't really done the same thing. And these are definitely issues that men face in today's society, which should definitely be addressed, and that should be addressed through intersectional feminism, for example. So yeah, while a lot of his descriptive analysis, yeah, definitely on point. You've identified correctly the issues. A lot of the like general, I suppose, prescriptions in a lot of way tend to either fall a bit short or imply something towards to a listener, to an audience who doesn't necessarily have like the full context behind Warren Farrell making these assertions.
We just can't get his name down. Okay, so next I have a voice question from Todd. I'm gonna voice him real quick. Todd, are you with us? Check 1, 2, 3. He's not voiced yet. Hold on.
Rip.
I'm gonna give him just one more. It's a little bit difficult. Like a few people step away from the whole thing. Todd, in 5, 4, 3, 2. I even told him to get ready to be able to chat.
Yo, you got me
There
there?
you are. Yeah, now I got
Hello?
you. All right, there we
And-
go.
Yeah, okay.
Todd.
I thought
Yep.
you were unmuting me. All right,
I
real
did unmute
quick.
you. Yeah.
I know. I didn't know I had to still hit the button. I'm a boomer. Excuse me. Okay, so if any able-bodied person, right? If you are an able-bodied person, why should anybody live at the other's expense? What moral authority do you have to justify your actions? What do you think we should do? What would you think if I went door to door to ask people to contribute to my bank account and my retirement? These may not be positions you hold, but it does sound like you are going toward these positions. So I'll listen for your response. Thanks for having me on.
Wait, sorry, was your question that if you're not able-bodied, how would I feel about people just going around door to door asking for handouts?
He's his question, if I can paraphrase, he's still able to talk. Do you want to? Let me try and. He's saying.
Sure, I'll
Please
reiterate.
reiterate. Yeah.
If you are an able-bodied person,
Mhm.
why should you be able to live at
Oh.
others' expenses?
Okay.
What moral authority do you have to justify your actions? And what would you think if I went around door to door to ask people to contribute to my bank account or my retirement?
All right.
Get off my lawn, you bum. Great, please. By all means.
Okay, I understand the question now. So this fundamentally, I think, ties into just like the concept of like a welfare state or just like taxation in general when it comes to social programs. So there's a lot of other things to like, analyze just beyond, being like able-bodied when it comes to your ability to be able to succeed in life and achieve the quality of life that you seek to attain, or one that is even, would be deemed acceptable by the general societal paradigm right now when it comes to like, what somebody would consider to be like a good life or a dignified existence. And these things have a lot to do with a lot of other things that go just beyond like the able-bodied section of your general like of an intersectional analysis. So things like, for example, economic condition, things like, for example, like racial categories, things like, for example, So the point I'm making here is just it's a bit like a simplistic thing to be like, okay, being able-bodied is the only thing that matters. But even then, a lot of the reasons why we support, for example, the like the welfare state or stuff like that, and like taxation as a concept and investing in social programs is because in general it just has positive outcomes in society as a whole, right? Generally, you as an individual will be better off if there are social programs that ameliorate the conditions of the people that are worse off in society, because it is often people that are worse off in society that tend to do things like, for example, enact the greatest amount of crime. And violent crime often, is enacted upon another person. So through these social programs and through the investment in social systems that seek to alleviate and minimize the amount of people that are in a poor socioeconomic condition, what you then do by proxy, if you want to view this from an entirely like egocentric perspective, helps you in the long run in the sense that it makes it decreases the likelihood of you being a victim for example, like violent attacks and stuff like that. On top of that, having other forms of like social handouts, as you would say it, and other social programs that seek to improve the quality of life of all of its citizens, just generally make the society as a whole more efficient, like more happy, more what's the word I'm looking for here? More efficient, more happy, and just generally just better off, which has like a million and one positive downstream effects when it comes to like the wages you're paid, the products you have access to, the type of people that are around you, your ability to form social bonds with other people, issues of, for example, like relating to like segregation and stuff like that, risks of, for example, like civil war, of intra-ethnic conflict, of intra-social group conflict. There are a million and one different like social tensions that are ameliorated through these social benefit programs, which are in your interest from an egocentric perspective. And then on top of that, I can also make the argument that, hey, you know what is the point of a society at the end of the day, right? The point of a society is fundamentally our ability to be able to like care for one another and to be able to care for the people who aren't necessarily able to be as productive or be as efficient as other members of society. Call this like a lib cookie, empathetic, like overly empathetic perspective or whatever. But generally, that's a big portion, a reason why we have society at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, is our ability to help other people and to lead to an increase in just general like happiness and utility around the world for all parties involved.
Okay.
Okay,
So
thank you
Flatter.
very much.
Yep. Thanks, Ted. Okay. Yeah, I forgot to mute this character. He could have said any kind of crazy thing on this thing. But all right, so Flat Earth has a question. He says, what do you think of pro-Israel organizations like the Anti-Defamation League and their power over the policies of American companies? Also, what do you think about the state of Israel and their border wall and extremely strong anti-immigration policies?
I think those policies are bad. I do not support them. I have the same principles to my country, to the United States, just as I would have them to Israel. When it comes to like influence of what's it called, like lobbying groups within different nations, the United States and Israel has a fairly unique history, which has led to it being in the sense it is right now. The ADL as an organization right now, I think generally has a positive effect on America, at least according to like my value system and stuff like that. They do have some pretty yikesy takes when it comes to the treatments of Palestinian people, and yeah, 100%. I'm not in favor of that. I'm very much in favor of Palestine and the Israel-Palestine conflict. I think the best way to sort of like solve that conflict right now would be looking at like a two-state solution as a possibility. But yeah, there are insane amounts of human rights violations that occur on between the border of like Israel or like what was Palestine and like Gaza and stuff like that, which definitely need to be addressed and seek to be and seek to be affected. So I think that the US should take a level of like stronger stance with its relationship and its diplomacy against Israel to let them know that, hey, you know what you're doing to the Palestinian people? This is pretty cringe. Try not to do that. And
Should we
enact
use
soft
the
power.
word cringe in our legislation?
Exactly. That is exactly what I proposed. Yeah.
I'm so sick of that word. All right, so local race realist asks, and they just keep winging it back here. What's your opinion on the USS Liberty and environmental determinism?
The USS Liberty is I think it's like a JQ meme. I'm not quite sure exactly.
Yeah,
What
it's a JQ meme.
Yeah, I don't care. When it comes to the environmental determinism, I am once again it comes back to what I said before. Like, what if there was like an innate thing among different people? I don't care. I want to ensure that every person is able to reach their like maximum potential in regards to how they function in society. So even if there were to be some aspect of a person's performance that isn't just 100% environmental, then it doesn't change any of my policy prescriptions. I can say that the literature backing like the fact that environmental conditions improve somebody's performance in society is far more substantial than the literature suggesting that like massive like underlying genetic traits that especially like overlap with racial groups have a significant effect on people's performance in society. That research is a lot shoddier than the one for the environmental side, but at the end of the day, as long as there is research indicating, which there will always be, that the level of environmental conditions somebody has access to increases or decreases their likelihood of being successful in society, as long as that research exists, which it always will, I will be in favor of the same policies I am right now, which is basically try to maximize every individual's potential within the planet or within the world to do, to operate based on their maximum potential and do as much as they can.
So Super Sour asks, what do you think about internet privacy? Is it something that we should be worried about? Should we trust our companies with data? I'm not sure where you fall on this AMA, if this is not a topic that you feel. But
Yeah, I mean, like most things,
yeah.
I would have to look at this. I don't have like strong feelings like, oh, get rid of all regulations, completely privatize. I trust you all of my information, or this is awful, nationalize everything, have it be super transparent. Most of the things I would just say is, hey, have like proper regulations. At least, I think the most important thing right now when it comes to internet privacy is just transparency, and then from transparency, from having access to all the information about exactly what happens to our consumer data, then I think we're in a better position to be able to make more like long-term like policy goals as for exactly how we want to treat issues relating to data privacy in the future.
Okay. And then Be Chill wants to ask a voice chat question. Be Chill, if you're in the chat, I'm going to unmute you. Be Chill, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay,
Can you hear
great.
me?
Yeah, go ahead and ask your question.
I just wanted to ask Rose what he thought about like
Hello?
as well as
So you
Wait,
cut
sorry,
out.
like
You
MMT.
cut out in the middle of that. You weren't muted. Would you mind just beginning your question again?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right. I just wanted to ask Rose what he thought about like social democracies in the global south and MMT, if you know.
MMT.
Modern monetary theory.
I would have to like double check what that means exactly. I know I've heard of it, and I know I've even had like arguments about it, but I just want to double check. But I don't think we have time for that. So I'm going to ask you first thing about social democracy in the South. I think that generally when it comes.
Also, I wanted to ask about what you thought about the Swedish full employment model that was like kind of discontinued in the early 90s or late 80s.
Yeah. Okay, let me write this down so I remember it. So when it comes to like social democracy in the global South, I think that the countries are in a position to be able to enact social democratic policies. Cool. A lot of countries are not in that position, and they need to get further on the sort of like developmental cycle. Things like breaking out of the poverty cycle. And I think that like more like global trade blocks have a strong role to play here when it comes to increasing the development of these nations, because at the end of the day, even if you look at this from an egocentric perspective, the ability of having a stronger more like developed nations around the world as a whole will just in general lead to an increase in efficient global trade, and therefore will benefit all parties involved in the long run. So I think there's like an incentive to do this from an egocentric perspective beyond just the humanitarian, I suppose, reason to do this, which is like I guess the main principle one that I hold. Now, when it came to your follow-up questions, was a full employment model.
Yeah, the Swedish full employment model.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that some level of like a federal, that's the United States, Frederick, of like
federal
yeah.
job guarantee is something I support. That's what I was just asking.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's definitely something that should definitely be looked into, and should be something that is available to the vast majority, to a lot of people. Right now in Sweden, we are not quite in the situation that you guys are in regards to unemployment. You at least before COVID.
I'm from Canada, by the way.
Oh, you're from Canada. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the US has more of like, at least before COVID, had an extremely low unemployment rate. So therefore, the pragmatic aspects of like the cost benefit analysis for federal jobs guarantee could be a bit, it's something that needs to be looked into a bit more. Right now in Sweden.
I think if you look at like the consequences of unemployment, like there's a huge correlation between like poor mental health and suicide when it comes to unemployment, and like the current like consensus, like trying to use unemployment as a policy tool, I think is very, like, if you were looking at it from a consequentialist framework, is definitely something that you'd want to replace with a guaranteed job with it, to have a buffer stock rather than unemployment to be employment. It's like,
I 100% agree with what you have with what you're saying here. And should there be like a situation in which you have like a significant amount of people that are unable to find like a job that satisfies them, then yes, 100% federal jobs guarantee. In Sweden, we have a bit more of like a more nuanced view on like labor relations. So we have a fairly prominent like labor office that seeks to assign people to, or not assign people, but to provide people options in terms of workplaces as much as possible. And generally, when it comes to this would obviously depend on the specific, like efficacy of the jobs programs on a like a different national level. But generally, I seem, at least intuitively, without having done a bunch of research into this, would be more in favor of having like strong labor offices that is able to not assign but like recommend people places within jobs that have sort of like organically arise within a like a market-based system than sort of the creation of jobs for the sake of creation of jobs. But like
but the problem with that for me is that the private market isn't able to sustain full employment or like employ everyone who wants
to be employed.
Yeah, we
that.
lost.
Like you could also have that, but
Yeah, 100%.
Hello?
And if that's like 100%. And if that's the case, then 100% we should have some form of like national jobs program.
Yeah,
But
and
if
the
it's
thing is,
possible
like,
to
it's
like
decentralized as well. It should be like federally funded and locally operated. So like that's a huge component of the Green New Deal. That's like one of like the most essential parts of the Green New Deal is like the job guarantee, because it has the potential to have like
okay.
just
Yeah, okay. Yeah. 100% I agree that we should have more programs that are like nationally funded and then locally operate. This is one of the major things that it has to do with that is a underlying principle in my proposals for example, the Swedish educational system. So yeah, I definitely understand the principle of nationally funded, like locally operated, and it could probably be applied as well to national job programs and national job guarantees.
Hey, thank you, Bicho, for like a
Right.
super insightful question. I was actually really
I
completely
can
unaware of
send
that. Yeah.
I can send like I have a doc on the job guarantee if you I could send it to you if you
Yeah,
like.
definitely. Send me a DM.
All
Oh,
right.
that's amazing. Okay,
Thank you.
so I want to wrap up this AMA. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time here. But if you'd like to remain in the chat and keep taking questions, by all means, you possibly can. I'd like to get through a couple more questions. Do you still have time?
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay, great. We'll try to get through a few of these quickly. So first off, I have no. I think God first is his thing. So his question is, why do you think fascists are pussy Nazis? Is this a direct quote that you said at some point, or is it just misstating your view?
That is not something. Wait, is it like is there quotation marks around it?
Yeah, essentially, I asked him. He says, "Why do you think fascists are pussy Nazis?" And I said, "If that's something he said in the past, and it's like a direct quote, then it's fair to ask. If not, it's just a meme question. I don't give a shit."
I don't
Yeah.
believe I don't. Yeah, I don't believe I
Okay.
said. Yeah.
I mean, it's like I
Why
think it's
not?
fair to hold the view that they're pussy Nazis, but
I mean, yeah.
yeah, it's also not productive. So Patrick Bateman says at the height of the BLM looting and rioting, Terry
Mhm.
Crews tweeted the following: "If you are a child of God, you are my brother and sister. I have a family of every race, creed, and ideology. We must ensure Black Lives Matter doesn't morph into Black Lives Better." Jesus. And people interpreted this as pro all lives matter statement. What are your views on this specific statement? And do you feel people were correct to interpret this as a pro all lives matter statement and cancel him over it? Also, wow, this is a lot here. Also, do you think protesters were right to target and destroy businesses and supermarkets and causing arson instead of targeting government institutions, like they did in the French Revolution?
Mhm.
I'm not sure is fully accurate there. A lot of stores got burned down during the French Revolution too. Where do you think the BLM movement went wrong to a point that mostly everyone stopped talking about it within 2 months of it happening? So this is it's a
Big
very pointed and loaded question here.
question.
Feel free to wade in.
Yeah, so when it came to that tweet specifically from Ted Cruz, what was the like the final phrase in that sentence
So
of the
his this is where a lot of people took issues with him. He said, "We must ensure Black Lives Matter doesn't morph into Black Lives Better."
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So this to me, like reasonably can be interpreted as an all lives matter statement, like at the very least, right? And especially like if I'm gonna do a bit of like media analysis, I suppose, like to support like that my specific like opinion on this in regards to the first question that was asked. When it came to like the sort of what's it called? Um the setup towards that final quote, it had a lot to do with it suggested more of like a race blind view of the world. Oh, I have like these people from all different like creeds, whatever, like we're all the same, which we are, at the end of the day. But we still need to like look at the specific, like the effects of social identity groups and the way that they play into like social structures and social functionings in today's society. And like the entire setup of that tends to lean towards like an all lives matter perspective. Like, oh, what if we go too far with saying Black Lives Matter? It's like, okay, shouldn't we just do all lives matter to ensure that doesn't happen? Yeah, it seems to be a fair reading of it to say that it suggests sort of like an all lives matter perspective in regards to that. Now, when it comes to the destruction of property, yeah, generally, I thought it's generally preferable to revolt against government institutions and government buildings, and publicly, yeah, like public institutions, definitely. I think that should be the main place where the violence is directed towards. When it came to the violence that was enacted towards like the smaller businesses, then yeah, I think that's obviously like a negative thing. It's sort of like part and parcel of of rights, though, of when like society doesn't meet the needs of a specific group of people, this type of thing will happen, and that's not an excuse for that type of behavior. But you kind of need to understand that that's the type of thing that happens whenever you have these like large scale social events. And like you said as well, the analysis on the French Revolution as being, they only very specifically targeted public institutions. Also, like
It's a little distorted. Additionally, like there were government facilities continuously targeted throughout that rioting, and
exactly, yeah,
it was just like they were less successful in burning down these places because they were more aggressively defended by federal employees for the most part,
definitely.
like
Yeah,
police and so forth. Those are the areas that they prioritize keeping a presence in, so that they weren't burned down. And keep in mind, like when this all like really started off, several police stations were burned to the ground, just to cinders. And that's as federal as you, or not as federal, but that's as government property as you can possibly get.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very directly tied to like the spirit of like the movement, right? But yeah, I do think that the federal government should step in and pay for a lot of the like the damages that occur to private businesses throughout this process as well. I think that's a justified thing to do because fundamentally the reason why this occurred, these riots occurred, these protests occurred, was because of a lack of the federal government and the United States of America as a whole to meet the needs of this marginalized group of people. So therefore, I think it's justified for them to alleviate the costs sustained by this through like federal grants or repairing the damages basically. Now where BLM went wrong, I would necessarily say that that it went wrong. I think overall it still had like a definite positive effect, but I definitely see the sort of like drop in popularity, and I think that a lot of it had to do with just I have a lot of beef with people that progressives, self-proclaimed, that take a lot of the like popular social movements and then run with them to a place that is so far outside the general like Overton window of what is politically pragmatic and what is politically efficacious to argue for right now. And because of that, a lot of these things were like, a lot of people were turned off from the movement. So things like, for example, the slogans like "ACAB," which, while the underlying sentiment, yeah, great, but oh my fucking god, the optics on that slogan is absolutely horrible. Things
I
like
mean, to
the
be fair, there's a lot of people that legitimately believe that. They legitimately believed in like the when they say defund the police, they mean it.
yeah, and yeah, that's another thing. People that just believe that
Mhm,
means just get rid of funding from the police law and just do
mhm.
nothing else. And yeah, and those things definitely had a detrimental effect on the political efficaciousness of Black Lives Matter as a movement. And yeah, had people been more, I suppose, like politically intelligent, they would have argued for more like politically efficacious, like slogans or like policy proposals that wouldn't just immediately turn off a bunch of different like what the white moderate, I suppose, which even though the white moderate is more dangerous or whatever, we still need to appeal to as many people as possible when it comes to pushing for these like social movements or whatever, right? So I feel like it went a little bit, it kind of got out of control after like the 2 month period when a lot of the I like saying Twitter progressives. They're not actually from, but that type of like, what's it called? The character traits within those types of progressives, where they just try to take something and make it as radical as possible, to some extent to virtue signal, and I'll stick with this. But yeah, and things like the ACAB and the defund the police slogan, which garnered a negative public opinion of the movement as a whole, and therefore tarnished a lot of its political capital.
Okay, super interesting. Okay, yeah, definitely hook up with the Yuckster, who seems to have like a lot more questions and everything to ask.
Mhm.
Rose Wist, I want to thank you for answering our questions in the AMA. And yeah, if you have anything that you're working on that you'd like to promote, or if you want to direct people to your site or anything like that, please feel free.
Yeah, the thank you very much for having me on here. First of all, it was wonderful, interesting questions. I love to see them. I feel like I would have preferred to do this. Um, I might want to do this again. I don't know what your policy on that is. I'm coming multiple
Mhm,
times, but uh, I had today actually. I had to get up at 12:30, and I had a panel that started at 1,
mhm.
and then that went until like 7 o'clock plus daylight savings time. So I lost an hour of sleep. So I'm operating on about like 3 or 4 hours of sleep right now, which is a struggle. But I've been trying to do my best anyway, and I hope I hope my rambling wasn't too incoherent.
It's not too
Um,
bad. Yeah,
all right,
right on.
wonderful. Not too bad. Okay, no, I see what you mean. But yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk here. The best place to find all of the information about me would be on my website, roserist.com, ROSEWRAST.com. You can find the links to all my different things, as well as that's where I have my mainstream chat, kind of. As for a specific place I would recommend you go to is my YouTube. That's sort of like where my main content base is. I upload there every day except for the days that I'm streaming, which is Wednesdays and Sundays. And yeah, uploads there daily. It's a pretty cool YouTube channel. A bunch of interesting stuff to take a look at there. If you need to scratch that skeptic debate itch, then yeah, I'm really trying to go after the Swedish skeptic community. and put some pressure on them. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on there. roserist.com, roserist on YouTube. That's where you can find all my stuff. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you to everybody who participated and asked questions and so forth. And sorry for talking about traps for way too long, apparently. Everybody have a good day.